Okay, let us be in prayer. Gracious God, you have invited us all, and we have heard that invitation sometime in our life, and we have said yes, and here we are. And we're grateful to be with you and to be with one another. Help us as we gather today to understand what it means to be invited by you into the kingdom, what that means for how we live now and always. Help us to struggle with the hard questions that these parables raise for us. And in the struggle, come to a deeper understanding of who you are and what it means to live as your people set in the midst of the world. In these times, oh God, we especially seek your way and your will, not just for ourselves, but for our church, for our country, for all the nations of the world. Guide us to seek truth, to find truth, and to speak truth. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so I think Ray joined us. Ray, just so you know, we're recording. We've decided to record. Everybody agreed, just in case there are some folks out there who have emailed me who can't be on this session, and so we're going to make that available to them. Everybody is on mute, and we have chat. Excellent. One quick announcement, and we don't need to give me feedback right in this space. You can chat me. You can send me a chat. You can send me a text. You can send me an email. If anybody is interested in attending the Drive Up Communion service that John has announced for San Diego United Methodist. San Diego United Methodist, it would be the first Sunday in June. If anybody's interested in attending that, please either send me a message, send John a message, send Victoria a message. Just let somebody know. They're trying to get an idea of how many people would be interested in something like this. If you have questions about it, email Victoria, John. You can even email me. We're not going to have a conversation about it right now, but they're trying to get an idea of who might be interested in attending the drive-in. It's the drive-in communion service the first Sunday in June. Okay. Alrighty, let's go back to sharing our screen. To our agenda we go. Here we are. We're going on an adventure. All right, buckle your seatbelts. It is gonna be a bumpy ride. All right, we have two parables, and they were bizarre and uncomfortable, at least for me. I'm gonna be honest. I had to really hash this out with Faith this week. So we tried to give you some questions ahead of time that I found helpful when Faith and I were talking to really kind of unearth things. If you did not find this bizarre and uncomfortable, that's fine as well. That's totally fine. Everything is just okay. So I think I'm gonna go ahead. Faith, do you want me to open it up to get some feedback from folks?
Sure.
All right, so feel free to unmute. Well, actually, I'm going to have you raise your hands. I'm not going to have you unmute. I'm going to have you raise your hands. But one of the first things we talked about was prior to reading the parables, thinking about who God is for you and how God shows up in your life, and then comparing that to after you read the parable. Did you have a different image? Were they different? All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. Donna had her hand up. Go ahead, Donna. I'll let you unmute yourself. Where is she? I have so many people on. I can't. Oh, there's Donna. Okay, I'm gonna unmute you. Oh no, I can't. Donna, you have to unmute yourself. Do you wanna say something, Donna? Donna Johnson? For some reason, it's not letting me unmute you. No. Okay. All right. Somebody else.
Got it. I think one of the things we're asking to help you frame your response is one of the things behind all of the parables is to give us a way of thinking about who God is, the nature and character of God, and what that means for how we respond or how we act. So as you think about these parables, how do they what picture of God do they offer to you? Does that contrast, conflict, compare to your own picture of God? That's kind of where we're going in the beginning.
Okay, so I think Donna unmuted herself. So Donna, go ahead, and then we'll go to Shannon.
It's okay. I'm fine.
Oh, you're good?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Shannon, go ahead.
It's interesting because I didn't read the agenda before reading the parables. And so when I read the first parable, Matthew 22, it was a really challenging one because, at the end, it has this image of like a really angry king, or I guess angry God, of, not accepting the invitation. And then you're kind of thrown into darkness, and there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, and that many are called, few are chosen. And like, I'm like, whoa, like that doesn't fit my image of a loving God. So I naturally did that exercise without reading the instructions to do that beforehand. And I really love this parable. Like, it's now one of my favorite scriptures because it made me realize that I do believe in a loving God. And, if you kind of understand the context and the time, it sounds like, the Jewish way was to try to wake people up, get people's attention. And sometimes they maybe did that by scaring the bejesus out of people. But it was, and there's this term that I remembered when I was in grad school. It's called eisegesis. And
I just taught Dana that this week.
Okay. And so I Googled it, and it says the process of interpreting text in such a way as to introduce one's own presuppositions, agendas, or biases. It is commonly referred to as reading into the text. And so because I'm a psychology person, I'm a therapist. And so when I read this text, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a perfect example of like narcissistic rage and narcissistic retaliation. That the father gets angry. You won't come to my son's party. If you don't choose me, I'm not going to choose you. But I don't think that's how God is. And when I think you guys have been teaching us about the Wesleyan quadrilateral and being able to discern truth, Scripture is just one piece of that. You also have to use reason and experience in Christian tradition. And so I really love this parable. I think it's awesome. So
excellent. Thank you. I totally appreciate that. I typed the word exegesis in the I looked it up. I spelled it correctly, I believe. So if anybody wants to Google it and see what it means, because actually what Shannon said is absolutely right on. And it was a word I learned this week through faith. So June has
we might say the opposite of eisegesis.
Eisegesis.
Okay, is what we're called to do, which is exegesis, where you draw the meaning out of the text. So in effect, you can't just dismiss the text because you don't like it. You have to find what it says. So the biblical approach is exegesis. Although a lot of pastors use eisegesis because I want to make it say what I want it to say.
Yeah, Joanne, I think you're asking how is it spelled. I put it in the chat. It's Exegesis. Exegesis. So if you want to.
That's exegete. Yeah.
Exegete, right.
Yeah. From
So
the
do we
Latin
think that was
draw
the
out of.
intent?
All right, hold on.
Was that the intent when the parable was written, or
And I'll come to you in a
is
minute.
that some layer we've added onto it? I mean, don't take it as written, but draw something out of it.
No, you have to take it as written and find the meaning in it. You ask what it was trying to say then, and then you try and say, what can it say to us now that makes sense?
And there's a couple of things that we're going to point out that I think will help.
Okay. Okay.
So let me go ahead. Jonathan, go ahead. You have a comment?
This may be all wrong, but I had this feeling when listening to Shannon talk, that what it's saying is that there is a way for people to come to God and have a good life, but most people won't bother. So you have the few and you have the many. And you being judgmental, all know people who you think are not on the right path. They're making a mess of their lives and that sort of thing. So the choice is, what are you going to do? Are you going to be one of the ones that is living the right way or the wrong way? And that's what this says to me. Now, that may be a totally wrong interpretation, but that's what it says.
Faith, do you want to have a response, or you want to?
I think we should just keep discussing.
Yeah, because I think so. I think there's, if you go, Faith delivered 2 sermons on these, and we didn't send them out to you yet. We will, because they were very helpful.
No. We will if you request them.
Sure, if you request them. If you don't want them, I'm not going to give them to you. But I mean,
I gave her a sermon on each of them that helped clarify some of her questions.
because I will be honest, I think the parables were complicated for me, and I did not find the book particularly helpful. So I just didn't feel like it really helped me dig any deeper. And so that's when she sent me these 2 sermons, and they definitely had different ideas and thoughts and concepts that made complete sense. And I just don't feel like the author really addressed them. So we're trying to get a little bit into that with, in question D on the agenda, it says, in the parable of the wedding banquet, verses 10 through 11, where servants bring in many. It was very interesting to me. If you noticed, the servants went out and brought in many good and bad people, lots of good and bad people. Yet the king identifies one, only one, who isn't wearing the wedding clothes or the robe. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So what did you make of that? Did anybody catch that? Yes, Kara, I will send you copies. Kara asking.
You've probably
You're
heard
at church that day, Kara. No, it was like 2014. I'm just kidding. Okay, who has got their hand up? I saw some. Okay, Michelle and Mike. I see that. Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
I wondered if it was like when people as adults are baptized, like a baptismal robe. That's what it reminded me of.
Yes. Ooh, gosh,
John wants to say something. Say something, John.
May I add a little historical context to this?
yes, go ahead.
Herod gave parties in his summer palace, which is near Jericho.
Jerusalem.
No,
Oh, yeah.
between the two. And basically, there was a ground rule. You probably were invited. It would be a wonderful party, but you will not survive. It was an invitation of great import, but very few people who attended the parties actually survived. Most of them were killed.
Okay.
That's historically what we're looking at here.
Okay. Mike, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Well, I didn't really understand what the author was trying to say until I saw the video.
Yeah.
And in the video, he put a huge emphasis on the unexpected. And when I look back at him, I see the unexpected in both of these parables in ways that I hadn't thought about it. And it's like, no matter where you think you are going or where you think you've got it right, be careful because you may not. So it's like, don't get comfortable keep trying to learn and grow in faith, because that actually is really important.
Yeah. So here, I'm going to read this one piece from Faith's sermon. It says, "We think of the gospel as a gracious word, a forgiving message, full of mercy and love. It is. Don't ever doubt that. We can build our lives on that truth. The gospel is also a fearsome, demanding word. There's a risk in receiving it. It holds confrontation and judgment." We had a little bit of argument on that word, "as well as grace and mercy. But here's the thing I highlighted. It challenges the way we choose to live. It asks of us as well as it gives to us." And I think that's what you're getting to, Mike.
Yeah.
Carol Serling, go ahead.
Yes. I just want to say that I like the idea of an all-loving God as much as anyone else, but I do think that these two parables show that there are conditions, and we have to meet certain conditions or we're not going to get into the party. Or if we do get in, we're going to get castigated because we're not dressed right, or you could interpret that in various ways. But I like the very end of the chapter where he says, "Each party also confronts us with the real possibility of exclusion. You're not guaranteed to come to the party or get in the kingdom or anything else just because you say, oh, I believe." You know, I do think that there are certain things that are asked of us. And if we don't try to live up to those, I don't know if we're going to get in the party. Secondly, if we're going to be able to stay there. That poor guy in the first parable sure did not get treated very well for wearing the wrong clothes, supposedly. But then he goes on to say, each challenges its hearers to examine ourselves, as to whether we take our status for granted. That's what Mike was talking about. Whether we prepare appropriately, and whether we remain ready even when ordinary time seems to drag on. So I think there are certain things asked of us, and I can't speak to all those. Perhaps Reverend Faith can better, but that's what I took from it. That it's not just, oh, I want to get into the party. You have to actually do something.
Faith, Faith, you want to talk a little bit about that? You can.
I think, Carol, I think you've hit an important point. I would prefer to phrase it not as conditions, but as responses. I don't think God says you either meet these and you're in or out, but grace and the gracious invitation, I think you can say, demands a response. It demands a particular kind of loving and living. One of the backgrounds that is not mentioned by him, but that other scholars have picked up on, is that when you came to a wedding, the host had a rack of clothing there, garments that you could put on to be ready. This person chose not to put one on, almost in an insulting manner. And it also does refer to the baptismal robe as well. So I think the question that I struggle with in here is, who is doing the excluding? Is it God saying, you're in, you're out, I don't like what you're doing, I don't like the way, or are we making some choices that self-exclude? And I think you have to wrestle with that.
Okay, so I've got Kathy has an email, a question in the chat. I'm going to read. Then I got Shannon. Then I got Jonathan. So Kathy's is, the people didn't want to come to the banquet from the beginning? Question mark. Why? Was it required? What's your thought on that, Faith? So this would be the people that they invited. Like this is the beginning part of the.
Okay, one explanation, and you can do with this what you will, is that, remember, this is Matthew who is writing.
Right. So important.
And remember that Matthew is has on several times set up a confrontation between, well, God came to the Jews, but the Jews rejected Jesus, and now the new ones are coming. So there is part of that historical context in there. But I'd also remind you that we just finished the parable that Matthew wrote that said in the end, everybody gets blessed. The parable of the workers in the vineyard. So you have these contrasting views in Matthew as well. But he's kind of showing that those who came before refused. Now, that isn't how, in fact, Greg Carey used in his video the term talking against. And I think we have to be very careful of not falling into the trap of setting against, us against them.
Yeah.
We got it, they don't.
Right. And you did put this in also in the sermon. You said Matthew was writing to a new emerging church. So again, here's where context matters. Context matters. There was conflict with the Jewish community. Professor David Lose calls it a family feud. He says Matthew and his community are caught up in a struggle with their Israelite kin about how to be faithful to the God of Abraham and Sarah, and in particular, whether Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah Israel's prophets had promised. Matthew may indeed have been drawing some strong lines, even setting one group over against another. She underlines this. It's dangerous and unhelpful to read it that way today. So, okay, Shannon, and then Jonathan, go ahead. Oh, wait, you're muted. Hold on. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. What's challenging with the Bible is that you get different perspectives. You know, like in this parable, it's like many are called, few are chosen. But then, like, it sounds like last week you guys discussed a parable where, like, it sounds like it would be many are called and many are chosen.
Right.
Like many are blessed, you know? And so
You got it.
It just reminds me of, because a professor said you have to be careful not to like build a theology based on one isolated verse in scripture.
So smart.
Absolutely.
Amen. All right, Jonathan, go ahead. I unmuted you.
Thank you. I want to talk about the response of the person who goes to the wedding. And they refuse to put on the wedding garment, the robe. That can be considered as not getting your mind in shape to participate in the wedding. For example, if they go to the wedding looking to enjoy the wine or enjoy social activities, but not to really, celebrate the bride and groom or what the wedding is about. And I think for me, this is an analogy that says you have to put on your Christian robe, your faith robe, your willingness to be open to God and what God's going to teach you, or you're going to miss it all. And for me, that is the message that this particular thing presents.
Thank you. So why don't we go and talk a little bit about the second parable, because then I want to put you in breakout rooms because there's a good group of us here. So, but I want to at least address the second parable as well. The question we put is in the parable of the 10 young bridesmaids / virgins, however you want to interpret that. Did the foolish ones have a choice after they heard the bridegroom coming? This is verses 6 through 10. And what we're talking about here is, if you remember, you have the 10 bridesmaids. 10 of them brought extra oil, 10 of them didn't. They all had oil in their lamps, right? And they're waiting. They hear the groom is coming, and the foolish ones go to the wise, oh, give us some of your oil so we'll have enough once he gets here. And the wise ones go, no, we're not going to share. And you go to the store and buy some. And they did. They went to the store. Did they have a choice? Could they have not gone to the store? Okay, Joanna and Carol. Okay, let's go ahead. Go ahead, Joanna. Oh, wait. Go ahead.
This is the practical accountant responding. Those 5 young people could have said, look, we'll just send one. And the one who goes shares all the oil that she has remaining with at least one other. And so one of those 5 could have had enough light for the 4 of them to be there until the 5th one came back with the pint of oil. So they did have choices.
They did. Okay. Carol, I think Carol Serling, you had a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was kind of along the same lines as Joanna's comment, just that 1 or 2 could have kept the light burning and the others could conserve their oil. I don't know that they actually even needed to go to the store. But like you said, maybe they would have provided enough light for the time, the interim when they were waiting, even though they were not as prepared as the others. I don't know that they had to totally go away. They could have worked it out by sharing and conserving what they did have.
Anne, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Okay, this is trying to think out of the box, but I'm wondering why the 5 other virgins didn't abandon their lamps and throw themselves on the mercy of the bridegroom, right?
Yes, you got it.
Okay, all right.
So
That's what I'm thinking.
It's interesting that, you know, clearly there's choices. And so here's one of the, here's what Faith puts in here. I'm
not sending her sermons anymore.
Why? It's good content. We need, you know, we have to have, I found them to be very helpful. I think there's other people out there that would agree with me. It's worth thinking about. The door gets shut, not because they left, but because they didn't stay. It wasn't their oil that was insufficient, it was their trust. If they'd stayed, the door wouldn't have been closed. They'd have been welcome inside. Fear sent them away. Their doubt, their view of what they lacked kept them outside. Okay? Carol Sadler, go ahead.
Well, what about the 5 who were prepared and yet refused to share?
Sharing is caring.
And it's a lack of trust as well.
Okay. All right. Ruth is over there. I see her smiling away. Go ahead, Ruth. Here, I can't, you have to unmute yourself. Okay, there you go.
Did it work? Did it work?
Yeah.
Did it work? Okay. Yeah, I think the problem is they're not focusing on the bridegroom. I mean, I think they forgot about the bridegroom. And the other thing with the guy with the wedding was he probably didn't even know he was at a wedding. He probably just came with a bunch of people, and that's the problem, is that they didn't realize what was important, right? He just showed up. It's like, what are you doing here? You're crashing the party. So with the, but I mean, with the bride, with the 10 virgins, I mean, they just completely forgot what the whole point was, and they went off. They should have stuck around.
Is John Conklin, is he wanting to say
Yeah,
something?
I do.
Okay.
One of the things that's always struck me about this parable is why didn't they just put their lights out and take a nap until the bridegroom got there? I mean, that's the simplest solution to this whole thing. And it doesn't make any sense to go running around the countryside trying to get oil.
Remember, guys, this is a parable meant to teach us something about God and our response to God. And if we start trying to get into it in terms of, well, you know, they should have, or they could have conserved oil, or we're going to miss the point of what the parable is doing.
All right, Ruth, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Well, the point is the bridegroom. So John, I mean, if they put their lights out, they wouldn't have seen him. They would have missed him. And that's the thing, see? That's why I had to keep him going, because they didn't know when he was coming.
Shannon?
lesson?
Good. Say it
Or was
again. Yeah, say it again.
Didn't Reverend Faith say that parables are meant to teach one specific lesson? So I'm just wondering what the one specific lesson is. Like, is it to be prepared, you know, or what is it?
Great question. Anybody else? Anybody have a thought on what's the one specific lesson? I've typed it in the chat. I'm really good at hosting these things. I add color commentary. Like, I'm like, woo!
Well, I think a way to answer that, rather than to say one specific lesson, because scholars and preachers disagree as to what that one specific lesson might mean. But what is it that you get from it? If you had to write a thesis statement, or you had to write a one lesson summary of it, what does this parable say to you?
Go ahead, Jonathan.
For me, these parables are intentionally ambiguous. And that means every person has to interpret it for himself. Now, you can listen to what other people suggest, but it's going to have a meaning to you. And that's the point of the parable. Therefore, I think the parables have more than one meaning in them, or can have, depending on how people interpret them.
Donna?
I was particularly caught by the position of predictability and unpredictability, because I think that's a message for life, that we have to live knowing that and make choices constantly about our response, whether it's predictable or unpredictable. And the author, Greg, what's his name, Greg? Yeah. Mentions that, makes a point of the surprise factor in life and how we're going to deal with it. And we don't know. There aren't any answers.
You just have to trust.
What's that?
We have to trust.
Yes, yes.
Willeen, go ahead, and then I'll go to Kathy. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me unmute your, there you go. Go ahead.
I kept thinking of my own death. For some reason, I read or I listened to the book, Carrie, and he never mentioned that, but all through it, I kept thinking, well, I don't know when I'm going to die. So I need to prepare myself and be ready for that death when it comes, and then I'll know more.
Kathy? Hold on, let me unmute you. Go ahead, you can, yeah, there you go, go ahead.
So there's a summary statement at the end, and I know the author said something about the summary statements being added, but therefore keep watch because you do not know the day or the hour, which supposedly I think must be supposed to be Jesus's words or not, because it's, yeah, see? So that's strange, or if it was added later and somebody, because they just wanted to explain that Matthew thought he better put a summation in. So I was just wondering about that.
Faith, you have
The words are certainly in keeping with what Jesus taught, but it's also, remember, addressed to a church that expected an immediate end. The Parousia or the Parousia, however he pronounces it, they expected Jesus to return immediately. And then when that didn't happen, a theology had to emerge to address that need. It's kind of like, what do you do in the meantime until the Messiah comes? And the answer is related to what we just heard, is you prepare for the end, the eschaton. You prepare for your own death by how you live now.
Okay, Jonathan, I'm gonna go with Jonathan, and then we haven't broken up into breakout rooms yet, so I really do want to give you some time to do that. So Jonathan, let's go ahead, and then I'm gonna break you up into, I think, 7 breakout rooms. I'm gonna unmute you before I do the breakout rooms, because that way you'll go into the breakout rooms unmuted. And I'll give you.
For those of you who've never done this, you don't have to do anything. I see some stunned looks. You don't have to do anything. You will suddenly find yourself in a breakout room, and then you'll find yourself out of it.
Sometimes people have to hit join. So if you see something that says join breakout room, click that. But other than that, it will take a second and you'll go into a breakout room. So we're at 10:42. I mean, I really want to be sensitive with time. So I mean, like 10 minutes, which is going to go by super fast unless maybe I'll do 12. And then I'll do 12 minutes and then we'll come back and we'll just kind of wrap up. And if you gotta get off, you gotta get off. No worries. So Jonathan, let me just hold your thought, write it down or add it to the breakout room so that I can go ahead and do this. Breakout room, assign. Okay, I'm gonna do 7 breakout rooms. So it's gonna be about 3 to 4 participants per breakout room. I am going to unmute you. So
Can you remind us of the breakout room questions?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. There's only one. Okay, wait, I'm going to mute you all again. Mute. Okay, the breakout room question is after the discussion we just had, has it helped to reframe or for you to rethink your idea of these 2 parables? And then do you have any takeaways? And you could also, if you so choose, somebody could even take some notes and be a recorder for the breakout room and report back. And so if somebody wants to do that, you're more than welcome to do that. But 1, did our discussion help reframe or help you rethink anything? And then 2, do you have any takeaways? All right, so I'm going to unmute you. Okay, you guys have to hit join.
Oh.
Some of the takeaways were in the breakout room. Yep, we got a 12-second message. Okay, yep, yeah. So some people I think saw it, some people I don't know with everybody's computers and iPads what you see and what you don't, but at least you got my message. So would anybody like to share before we wrap things up here? Michelle, you want to share, or you're just giving me a thumbs up? You want to share, Michelle? Oh no, I don't know why. Sometimes
Hello.
There you
Can
go.
you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
I thought it was on the first parable when we talked about the clothes and willingness to put them on, Joanne brought out, and I thought it was a good point. Contemporary wise, it's like people not wanting to put on masks on their face, you know? It's kind of like.
Yeah, interesting.
That was an interesting point.
Yeah. Anybody else want to share? Ken?
Or our group, I think we decided that, or we thought that preparedness is what we all is where we all need to be. We need to constantly be working towards the end and be prepared for the end, because we don't really know when that's coming. So I think that's one thing we decided. One other question we had for Faith was, if you put yourself in that crowd of people, what were they thinking when Jesus, I mean, if we're somewhat confused with the whole thing, how would the crowd respond to these parables at that time? We were just curious about that one. What the ordinary guy in that crowd thought. Who knows? Faith,
Okay.
you got an idea?
I think they thought exactly what us ordinary people thought. Some of them were absolutely disturbed. Some were horrified. Some thought their ideas were turned upside down. Some got pretty angry at him because of some of what was being suggested by what he taught. But remember what Carrie said and what we said about what parables do. They're supposed to poke you. They're supposed to prod you. They're supposed to give you an alternative view as to where you are. So if we read a parable and it's like, oh yeah, it's a nice little story, doesn't disturb me in the slightest, we miss the point. So I think they react the same way, Ken, that you and I do. I think some people went, yay, particularly those who felt that nobody cared about them, and some of the parables says God cares about you. And then other people said, now that makes me mad to think that they're going to get the same kind of love from God that I get. So there you are.
There you go. There you go. Thanks, Faith.
Mike, thumbs up. Love it. Go ahead, Carol. You have to unmute
I just wanted to keep reiterating this because I thought it was very brilliant of Nancy Lilliott in our breakout group to emphasize the need for receptivity, that to be receptive to that call, and that you have to be receptive before you can even think about being prepared. Because if it's not something you're open to, then why would you bother preparing? And I remarked that we've all encountered people who may know that we're Christian, and maybe they don't have anything to do with it. They're like the people who beat you up, beat up the people who came to invite them. So it reflects back to a lot of the other ones, and the statements about pearls before swine and this sort of thing brings that up in my mind too. But I love the idea of being receptive and prepared. That seems to be the bottom line here for me.
Excellent. All right, so it's 11 o'clock, and I want to just be a good steward of your time. Time boundaries matter. So let me go ahead. I'll close us in prayer, and if you want to stay on and ask a follow-up question or have a follow-up reflection, we will do that for the next 15 minutes or so. So let's go ahead and just be in prayer for a moment. Loving and gracious God, we give you thanks for this time for us to be together. We come to you with questions and wrestling with your word, and we're just so grateful that we can be in community with one another, to have these conversations, to gain new insights, and learn from one another. It's a blessing to see all of your faces and just to be in this time together and to feel the Holy Spirit move through us. So we just thank you so much for that. We ask that you continue to guide everyone on this call, everyone who wasn't able to join this morning. Help us to be good stewards of how we can be helpful to them and how we can continue to do outreach and make them feel connected and not isolated. We ask that you be with all those who are struggling with COVID-19 and this horrifying pandemic, and also those on the front lines. Help us to do no harm, and to truly just express your love and compassion in the world as we are your hands and feet. So we ask this all in your Son's name. Amen. All right, so
we want to remind you, we have a Faith Flick coming up for those of you who like the movies.
Oh, yes.
We have chosen one, and we're going to watch it and then come together for a Zoom discussion. So you watch on your own time, bring your own popcorn, and the movie will be a Netflix movie, and it's called The Two Popes.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat. So it's The Two Popes. It's on Netflix. If you do not have Netflix, let Alex Bridges know. We may be able to get you access to to the church's Netflix. I say may because I don't know exactly, but you can let Alex know. He only has a handful of them, but you can certainly do that. The Two Popes, June 5th, which is a Friday, Faith and Shannon will lead a Zoom discussion at 7 p.m. You should see this in your e-news. Eventually a newsletter will be coming out, a paper newsletter, so you should see it in there as well. All right. So you feel free to stay on and ask questions, and if it's time for you to move on to something else.
Bless you, love you guys.
Bless you and love everyone.